Hello, welcome everyone to Photovoice Worldwide's free community webinar, What is Photovoice? My name is Erica Belli and I'm an educator and facilitator at Photovoice Worldwide. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Dr. Laura Lorenz, who is Photovoice Worldwide's co-founder, and Stephanie Lloyd, consulting lead for us. Welcome and thank you for being here. We're very excited about all the learning that we will be doing during this hour together. Photovoice Worldwide, if you don't know, is a small women-owned social enterprise that is really dedicated to training, consulting, and building a peer-to-peer community around the Photovoice method. We're a fully remote team with members in the US, Europe, and Middle East. And over these years, we've had the pleasure of working with universities, organizations, institutions, and individuals worldwide to support them in doing Photovoice ethically, successfully, and respectfully. You can find out more about us at www.photovoiceworldwide.com. Our tagline and what we believe Photovoice can do is show stories, share power, change lives. We provide trainings, as we were saying, in the Photovoice method, whether are shorter trainings of 3 sessions or longer and more intensive trainings like the summer school. We also provide consultings for organizations and institutions, and we build products such as books and toolkits, as well as strive to build a community for peer-to-peer learning around the Photovoice method. We run a conference, Photovoice conference, every 2 years, and we also have a monthly community of practice around Photovoice and have this free community webinars so that we can talk Photovoice and learn from one another. In terms of our time together today, this is a little bit of our group etiquette. First of all, we'll start with some polls, so please feel free to chime in and share your thoughts voting in. Also, you can use the chat throughout the session, but know that we actually have an allocated Q&A time at the end. We thank you in advance, of course, for keeping it kind and professional. We're all here, of course, to learn from one another. If you can, please keep your microphone muted unless you're speaking. That really helps because we are recording this session. Feel free to have your camera on or off, and then you will find this webinar on our YouTube channel. So let's start by gauging your interest, understanding a little bit more about what describes your interest in Photovoice. Are you just curious about it? Do you want to use it in your work? Have you maybe participated in a Photovoice project? Do you teach or research participatory methods? Or are you looking for creative or community approaches to engagement? Let us know. So thank you so much for voting in. With no further ado, I would go into answering the big question. What is Photovoice? And before that, I might keep you on your toes for just a little longer because you might be wondering what you're looking at. This picture of a woman working on the land with a child on her side, with a young child on her side, was a photo taken by a participant of the very first Photovoice project. And this is a photo that is very dear to me and that I have in my workspace because I look at it every time I have to remind myself of the power of photography and where photos can lead. This photo brought change. This photo brought childcare facilities to women in rural China, Yunnan, where this first project was took place. And the women were advocating to have childcare, and in the end, policymakers listened to them by looking at their pictures and having them in the room talking to them. And I think this is a reminder again of how photography could be a real catalyst for change. And telling you a little bit more about this very first project, it was led by Dr. Carolyn Wong and Mary Ann Burris through the Ford Foundation, and they went to rural China in a region called Yunnan and brought in a feminist approach to research, which really means doing research with and not on, right? So this idea of producing knowledge through collaborative research. In this case, they gave 165 village women cameras so they could take pictures of their lives. And then they spoke about these photos and presented their work to journalists and policymakers. As a result, these policymakers were inspired to fund new programs that met the participants' expressed needs, which is fantastic, of course, and what we strive for when we are working with Photovoice. This was a groundbreaking project that was establishing really Photovoice as a method that then has been later used all over the world for more than 30 years. So, in a nutshell, if I have to describe to someone what Photovoice is, I might say that it's a participatory method that closes the knowledge gap between people with valuable lived experience and the people who make decisions about their lives. As the name says it, Photovoice includes photos and written narratives, so photo and voices. And it's a group process of both community and personal reflections on these photographs and narratives. The co-production of the knowledges that happens is then usually shared outside the group to inform and foster change. In the words of the mothers of Photovoice, Carolyn Wong and Marian Burris, Photovoice provides the opportunity for community members to creatively document their concerns and simultaneously act as a catalyst for change. I love this. Photovoice, it's also a method that, of course, can help people share their experience, their stories, that can support them in communicating to others and even advocate for their group or situation. The photo and the text become very important, powerful data that can provide a more complete view on a given situation and can get you access through the rooms where change happens, where policies happen, and in that way can cross boundaries and levels of power imbalances. Photovoice has been also used by people living in very different circumstances. It has been used with people living in challenging circumstances, especially, and also by professionals of all different fields. Among the goals of Photovoice, of course, first I want to think about creating the space, right, to reflect and record on their lived experience, on people's lived experiences, also on their communities or personal needs, strengths, and challenges. Photovoice also wants to use the images to promote critical dialogue and start real meaningful conversation that can also deepen the understanding of a given circumstances, group, or situation itself. And then wants to share these insights and bring these stories outside the groups to stakeholders and decision makers, inviting so connection and change. Photovoice is not the only participatory method. Participatory methods include theater, videos, MOPs, art, for example. So you might be thinking about doing community engagement and using Photovoice as part of your project, but not be limited to using Photovoice in your project. And also a very important distinction to make. Visual methods also include photo elicitation, for example. And what's the difference between photo elicitation and photo voice? Well, photo elicitation is really a one-to-one interview where you're inserting a photo into the research interview to understand the word as defined by the subject. While photo voice is a type of participatory action research that asks participants to represent their lives, point of view, and experience using photographs and text. So just to make sure, with participatory methods, photographs are taken by the participants, not by you. A possibility, of course, is to start with photo voice and then add individual interviews about photos after, or vice versa. It is important that you think about adapting photo voice to your context or to your research. And before passing the baton to my colleague Stephanie Lloyd, who will talk about the different steps of Photovoice, I wanted to highlight this beautiful quote, again by Dr. Caroline Wong. Participants may find Photovoice an ideal methodology for creatively documenting their environment and its resources. In doing so, they demonstrate their own ingenuity and imagination. And what has not ceased to surprise me over the years of working with images and groups of people is how creative people can be in sharing their life through images, and how that shows really the ingenuity, the imagination, but also gives folks agency over their creativity and how to share their photographs and experiences with others. So I guess, Stephanie, you're up next with the steps of Photovoice.
Thank you. Now that you've heard a little bit about the background and history of Photovoice, I'm going to walk you through the basic process and steps. So the Photovoice path was developed by Photovoice Worldwide co-founder Laura Lorenz, and it's a good way to introduce Photovoice, your project steps, and guide folks along the way. So it closely follows the structure of workshops and has a series of steps for your project. And one really ethical imperative is that participants understand what Photovoice is, what they'll do during their project, what's being expected of them. And this path is a nice visual to help participants and stakeholders quickly grasp the steps and the goals and understand where they are. Using visual images like this can help people with different levels of education and communicate effectively with each other. So I like to have this visual at each session and show where you are along the way, along the process, and what will be worked on that day in a particular session. So let's jump in. Step one, before we hand anyone cameras, it's important that they learn about the Photovoice method, the project goals, and what's expected of them. Team building and icebreaker activities are also really nice to include along the way, but at the beginning, especially to encourage group cohesion and make sure people will feel comfortable sharing their photos later. So the first session should also revisit the consent form, even if they've already completed it ahead of time. And you'll want to review ethical and safety considerations related to your project, making sure that, you talk through the responsibility of having a camera, taking photographs in public spaces and what that means, and, how people may move about with their cameras, and that participants have the right to refuse at each of these steps. They want to, this is a very participatory process, so I want to make sure that they're included and that's their voice saying, yes, I want to do this and I want to move along. So the facilitator should make sure that participants know how to talk about the project and who to contact if there's any questions that arise. If you're handing out cameras, you might have participants practice with them and let them know what they should expect along the way. The next step is taking photographs related to a prompt. This might happen during the project sessions with a partner or outside of the project session time, alone. And the facilitator should let participants know if they can bring previously taken photos or if they want new photos with a project camera. This is also something that can be discussed as a group and decided. Talk to your participants about how they can get the photos that they want, especially when there are things that might be hard to capture. So using symbolic or metaphorical photos might be an important in your context. Also, some Photovoice projects have used photo journals where participants can take notes while they write their photos to help them with their photo sharing and caption writing. And this might be especially helpful if your sessions are longer apart. So if you give them a longer time to take their photos, you might want them to write some notes along the way so they don't forget when they come back to the group. Step 3. So when participants bring their photos back, it's important to check in on their experience. The facilitator should lead this group discussion and also leave room for participants to share how it was to take photos related to a prompt. We know everyone knows how to take photos these days, especially with your phone camera in your pocket, but it's a little bit different when it's related to a photo taking question related to a specific prompt. In a particular area. And so have participants troubleshoot or brainstorm solutions to any challenges they may have encountered in getting the photographs that they want. Next, participants will discuss their photographs. So this could be with a larger group, or with a larger group where people don't know each other as well. It might be helpful to have participants share several photographs with a partner and then come back to the larger group and present together. Can you go to the next slide? And so when you're with the larger group, make sure that everyone has a chance to share at least one photo. And so you're sharing the airspace and making sure that those folks who are talkers and those who are a little bit more shy have an equal opportunity to share their photos and talk about what's important to them. Consider the makeup of the group when making decisions about how to best share the space and make sure everyone feels comfortable in sharing their photos in your space. Showed is a tool that Carolyn Wong uses in her work. This is a series of questions that you may have posted at the front of the room or on screen if you're working virtually, and everybody may respond to them as they're explaining their photos. It's an option for presenting photos that helps kind of guide people with this series of questions. Photo is another tool from the literature that has slightly different set of questions that provide support for participants to share and write about their photos as well. Some projects offer these questions on a note-taking page so participants can take notes on their photos, which can support them in their presentation and also in their caption writing as well. So you may have folks start by writing notes on their photo and then they present them, or you may use this after they've presented them to help them organize their thoughts for caption writing. So step 4 is in fact writing or dictating captions. So what sets PhotoVoice apart from other methods is how the photos and captions work together. It's critical that any photo that will be shared outside of the group will have a caption, narrative, or words around it that speak to the photographer's intention. There's many techniques for caption writing, and facilitators should encourage participants to make the project their own by using the caption that best speaks in their voice. So this could be a long caption, this could be poetry, this could be a caption that is in a native language. There's many options in addition to showed and photo acronyms that we saw earlier. In this example from a PhotoVoice project, we don't know if these cans were in the sink already when the photo was taken. But the beauty of PhotoVoice is that it doesn't matter if the photo was captured at the moment or staged ahead of time. The true magic is participants and co-researchers being able to share the story that they want to tell through their photos and captions. So interesting when you're facilitating, making sure you're helping participants find their voice and share their story in the way that they want to tell it. Steps 5 through 7, as we make our way down the path, the last few steps are really about theming and outreach, where the group gets to decide what's most important to share with others. So theming allows co-researchers to step back and think about sorting photos or creating categories. I like to use the example of, after we've done all of this work talking about photos and talking about lots of different ideas and themes that come up, if we walked into a store and we saw the books were on top of the shoes, were on top of jeans, were on top of records, for example, it would be so disorganized and we wouldn't be able to understand from the outside. And I like to use that analogy as, in PhotoVoice, we need a way for those outside the group to really understand the conversations we've had, what's most important, and the work we've done. So this poster from a PhotoVoice project, where participants identified themes. And you can see one project photo fits into each theme. Obviously, there were more photos in those, but this is a nice succinct way and a nice product for a conference, and also could be something that participants take with them. And you can see the participant generated themes, and that was through discussion and through facilitation and helping to understand what is this all about? What is most important and what do people need to know outside of the group to kind of organize the process? As Carolyn Wong originally intended, the goal of PhotoVoice is to share the information outside of the group. So participants also play a role in what photos and captions should be shared, who needs to hear this information, and where or how you will reach these people. Consider multiple outreach options if you have time and budget, and including participants in the planning project if they have an interest. So in addition to an in-person exhibit, the project team may decide to create a website or a virtual gallery as well. And these products should be directly related to who needs to hear the information and how to reach them. So the facilitator may have some ideas that they're sharing, but also may leave it up to the group discussion to decide, if they want to bring in their friends and family, for example, if it's policymakers that need to hear this, if it's local community members, that will depend on the context and population of your project. Step 8. At the end of a project, it's important to wrap things up properly. Celebrate everything that's been accomplished, reflect, and determine what's next. It can be hard for groups to say goodbye, and some might have ideas for staying connected, further outreach, or even another PhotoVoice project. Make sure that your project includes time and space for participants to wrap up their engagement because others may not have time and space, and this will be the last time that they're working with you. Keep in mind that every project is a little different depending on the context and the population engaged. So you may do these steps in a slightly different order, or you may repeat steps before moving on to the next. For example, ideally the facilitator would offer several opportunities for photo taking and discussion before deciding what's important and how to share outside of the group. So you may spend some time in that middle section of the path before moving forward. Now I'm going to pass it along to my colleague Laura, who will tell you about some of the benefits and examples from past Photo Voice projects. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie. So we're going to look at some of the benefits, one of them being that the data, the photos, the captions bridge the gap between decision makers and communities. It creates an opportunity for dialogue and discussion. Participating in a photo voice project builds teamwork, communication, critical thinking, and advocacy skills. And these are skills that endure beyond the project itself, that become life skills. The data generate a more holistic understanding of a situation, very different from just statistics. And a major benefit is that the project can identify both needs and strengths, problems and um, uh, assets in a community. So some of the purposes and benefits include confronting fundamental problems, gathering local perspectives, including diverse voices and viewpoints. It counteracts stereotypes and assumptions that we may have about a community and people who live there. It tells stories of lived experiences and, of course, generates data. Major purpose and benefit is raising awareness of these data, of these lived experiences among community members, funders, and policymakers, and the data that generate, inform, and initiate action. And it promotes healing of individuals and communities, and it helps community members to reflect on the commonalities among their different experiences and helps people to feel less alone. Many different individuals and groups around the world have benefited from participating in Photo Voice, and they include community residents, community health workers, patients with chronic health conditions, people with disabilities. Many, many projects have been done with young people, with youth and teens. Also, individuals experiencing homelessness, frontline workers who don't always get listened to by authorities or people above them, and allied health students and patients. It can be a wonderful learning experience as well for them. So here's a photo from a study on anxiety disorders and emergency room use. 8 people living with anxiety disorder participated in the project, which was held in Indianapolis in the state of Indiana in the United States. And help me understand, what do you see in this photo? What do you think that the person who took this photo intended you to understand? Please write in the chat or feel free to speak up. I'm trying to look at the chat here. It's a long journey. Very good point. Those are a lot of steps to climb up to that, what we see at the top there. Anybody else? Uphill. That is right. You're climbing uphill. Yes, not so easy. Takes a lot of energy. Another aspect is there's not a lot of light while you're climbing uphill, up those steps. All right. Thank you for that. Let's look at the caption. So the photographer writes about the majority of days where the steps in front of me look insurmountable. The bad days with anxiety help me to really appreciate the days where I am stress-free. On the good days, I'm at the top of these steps looking down at the beautiful view. So this co-researcher is telling us about the positive and negative things that he wants to communicate with this one photo. The challenge of climbing, but when you get to the top, the beautiful view. So these photos are each show something positive and negative in Mdansane Township. This was a project with 16 young people aged 16 to 32 working, all members of a youth-run nonprofit established in the township. On the left, we see people have been growing vegetables in the plots and their house plots. And this was a training run by the Youth Academy for local residents and people taking advantage of that training and that opportunity to grow vegetables both for eating and for selling. On the right, we see an area where trash gets dumped behind people's homes because there aren't litter boxes people could use and have collected by the municipal authorities. And this creates problems, health problems for residents, their children, and their animals. Here again, we're seeing positive and negative, safe and unsafe areas for girls in rural Sweden who are subjected to gender-based violence. On the left, we see a girl hugging her mother, the embrace showing safe, being safe, feeling safe at home. And on the right, we see a place where it might be very dangerous for girls to be walking through alone, especially in the long Swedish winters. This photo again shows both positive and negative in one photo. And U.S. military veterans, young veterans, can have real challenges feeding their families. They don't receive a lot of money after serving in the military often. And so the positive is the mother is very happy that her daughter has picked a healthy snack for herself from the shelf. But at the same time, granola bars can be very expensive to purchase, a challenge for, budgets. So that's a mix of health and hurt, the mother says. And this photo from a project with 8 people living with brain injuries in the state of Massachusetts in the United States. Here, the participant gave her camera to her mother to take this photo, and she's intentionally showing us the scar on the back of her head where she had surgery to remove a brain tumor, and for 17 years she covered up the scar, grew her hair long, always worried whether it would be showing or not. And during the project, she decided, what the heck am I doing? I'm a bold person. And she writes, I'm no longer shamed by lack of hair and scar. It represents a new freedom, pride in what I have overcome. And this photo inspired people living with brain injuries all over Massachusetts and beyond. And when I went to her funeral just a few years ago, dozens of people spoke about this photo and how much it had inspired them. So with Photovoice, as my colleagues have spoken of, we are aiming for impact. We're aiming for change. And these outcomes and benefits can occur at different levels. Here's an example of the levels where it can occur. This is the social ecological model. So the benefits, the outcomes can occur for an individual. They learn something new. They may change in their attitudes towards themselves. Interpersonal, meaning relationships and ability to communicate with others, for example. Organizational, an organization may take this information and develop new programs that are based on findings from the study. And community and society. A community might decide to build sidewalks, or a society might decide to start some new policies based on findings from a PhotoVoice project. And those larger types of changes at the community and society level might also need to happen, with larger projects and more participants, as we saw with that first project by Carolyn Wong and led by Carolyn Wong and Marianne Burris, where the regional authorities instituted a new project of childcare centers at the village level, and 165 women participated. So it's good ethical practice to also always remember, how are your participants feeling during this project? No matter what level of impact you're aiming for, think about your PhotoVoice experiences of your co-researchers. And here I've just informally placed photos on this framework, and participants really enjoy working with this type of framework or other frameworks that might be relevant to your project and your context, and placing their photos. It's a different kind of thinking, and people really like it. It can generate terrific conversations. And also think about, for example, a project I'm working on now with adults with stroke on their access and engagement with green space. One participant has, or several, are talking about their feelings of connection with nature, with not just trees and plants, but with animals and with insects. And we can think of that as a spirituality or values, and where could that fit into a framework like this? Also, maybe it makes us rethink our definition of community. Maybe it's important for some of us to think beyond people, but also the environment and the creatures that live there. And where will your project have impact? So today we've been looking at what is PhotoVoice, its foundations, its fundamentals. We've heard about the steps of PhotoVoice, the process, and we've reviewed some benefits and examples from different projects. And we want to encourage you that as you continue your learning about PhotoVoice, and frankly, we are always learning about PhotoVoice, every project, every training we do learning too. Make PhotoVoice your own. Adapt it to your context and your purposes and the people you are working with.
So we want to thank you so much for joining us today. These are all of our handles. You can find us on different social media platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, but especially Instagram. On our YouTube channel, you will find different webinars that we have had over the years. Different resources can be found also on our website, PhotovoiceWorldwide.com. That's also where you can check out some of our trainings. And then don't hesitate to be in touch with us. You can write us at info@pvdww.org. Thank you so much for being here today, for joining us for this webinar, and we hope to be in touch with you very soon.